Okay, hello David, we're now live. So I'm going to welcome our audience. So good morning to everybody, or good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world, to this live broadcast on the Videcom's Employability Matters platform, where we discuss issues that affect Black and ethnic minority employees in the diaspora workplace. If I'm honest with you, a lot of the issues we talk about here, they affect many employees, different employees from different backgrounds. But I'm focusing a little bit on, or I'm focusing a lot more actually on the Black and ethnic minority group, because I belong to that group. And also there's a lot of data out there, a lot of statistics that talk about the experiences that people have, which we know are not necessarily pleasant ones. And one of the things that I'm interested in is, because I'm a counselor by background, I see employees who've had difficult experiences at work, and I hear a lot of stuff, and it just didn't seem right to sit back and do therapy and then go back and do some more therapy. It makes sense to give opportunities and create a forum for people to be able to discuss many of these issues. In particular, what I find is when one person says something, they really feel isolated in that situation and feel like it's really about them and it's something to do with them. But actually what this platform does is it gives people the opportunity to recognize that actually it's not unique to you alone. It's almost universal. It affects many other people. That in itself is quite cathartic, because it's nice to know that you're not the problem. There might be something out there that is a problem against a group of people. So having said that, to anybody who's watching us or watches us later on, or watches a rerun of this broadcast, today I have with me, and I'm very excited to have with me, David Liddell from the TCM Group. Hello, David.
Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. And Boomy, thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this today. Really looking forward to it.
Excellent. So what we normally do here, David, is we have a chat. I like to call it a chat because we deal with a lot of formality in the workplace. Everything is formal, everything is structured, but here it's a place where people can just talk informally and talk about whatever it is that's affecting them as far as workplace issues go. So feel free to chat away as much as you like, David. I'll be asking you some questions. We'll be having some conversations, but just easy to it, and let's go. So before I start having the chat, I get carried away, by the way, because these issues are very close to my heart, as we started discussing in the background. But before I go into the chat, David, would you mind telling us a little bit about you and the TCM?
Of course. I mean, and just going back to the point of a chat, Boomy, the world of work changes one conversation at a time. And what I love about what you're doing and promoting dialogue and promoting this forum to exchange ideas is exactly what we're trying to do at TCM, and recognizing, yes, systemics and structural and cultural factors, they're clearly important. We need to discuss them today. But also it's important to focus on what you've just described as the conversation. And to me, it's the power of dialogue and the power of conversation. So I really welcome this opportunity to be part of that, and celebrating and supporting the power of dialogue between us and obviously within our organisations. So well, thanks thanks so much for having me. And so my background, I've been cut me in half. Well, please don't cut me in half. I prefer not to be. But you're going to find a mediator in there. So my background originally, I went and studied a degree, in my first degree in race and community relations. The late 80s, which was a really interesting time post Thatcher and in the sort of the major government at that time. And I was really concerned and passionate about developing inclusive communities and tackling issues around race discrimination in particular and racism. So I went to then work in Leicester in the East Midlands. Hopefully there might be a few people here who know the lovely Leicester. And I worked there initially working with Black minority ethnic communities to engage them in social and economic regeneration programs and some health, trying to tackle some of the health inequalities in Leicester. And then I was invited to set up a program promoting mediation and restorative justice within communities. And I've been working with a lot of very broken and damaged and isolated and excluded communities through me. So I was very passionate about trying to find alternative ways of involvement and including them. So I set up a project promoting mediation and restorative justice and ran that for 8 or 9 years. I used to be an active member of the Racial Equality Council and an active member of the hate crimes unit. I used to review the police's response to hate crimes in Leicester. So I learned a lot about racism and also the police's response in Leicester, in particular to racism. And then I went to do an MBA at the lovely De Montfort University, and then I set up the TCM Group. And the reason I set the TCM Group up, Boomy, was because I was working in communities and within society where I felt there was very little done to tackle these issues, but I really felt passionately there was very little being done in workplaces, and I wanted to start helping to bring these principles into the workplace. So for the last 20 years, I've been bringing the principles of restorative justice, dialogue, mediation, conflict resolution, leadership, really refocusing on the HR function. I look at the processes, and hopefully, Boom, we will talk about some of the processes in our organisations, which to me, in many cases, are very broken. So I help organisations to rethink and remodel how they deal with this stuff, and I absolutely love it. It's one of the most enjoyable and rewarding jobs, and I meet wonderful people who are passionate about this. And also work with people who are in a very difficult position, Booming, as a mediator, and try and help them to find some comfort. And my overarching, genuinely held belief, and I'll just say it now, is the best way of tackling these issues is through dialogue. And I genuinely believe dialogue should have primacy. And I think we're so fearful of dialogue. We find so many reasons not to have the conversation. And I genuinely believe you can resolve so much through the conversation. So that's me.
Perfect. So you're a perfect person to have this dialogue with this morning. In that case, you see that thing you talk about, the power of dialogue and having conversations. I see it a bit like when you can't swim and you look at water and you think, no, not going near it. But actually, you drink water and you shower in it. It's valuable to you as a human being. So because you can't swim doesn't mean you shut water out completely. You find a way of tolerating it in small doses till you get good with it and good at it as far as swimming goes. Dialogue is powerful. Conversation is powerful. It changes a whole lot of things. So I'm right behind you there in that one. The power of dialogue matters a lot.
Yeah.
So to go into the conversation we're going to be having today, we did we had 3 sessions that we were going to do around bullying and harassment. It turned out that it wasn't just you and I that are passionate about this subject. There are other people out there as well. So
absolutely,
we've done a lot already in the first and the second broadcast. So I wanted to take a very general approach to this in this context, in the sense that as individuals, when we step into organizations, or even before we step into organizations as employees, is there anything that we can do? Are there some things that we need to be thinking about before we go in? And I'm asking this question because as people who have migrated, or people who've come from different backgrounds, you tend to migrate because you want something so much better for your life. And certainly for Black people, and I will say that because I know of it, because I'm part of that community, you tend to look for employment. And we step out and go and look for work, and then we get work, and then we don't realize that there are some things to think about apart from just having employment, or the quality of the employment experience. So what sorts of things would you say, David, we ought to be thinking about before we step into an organization?
That's a great question. And I think it's a really powerful question because, we talk a lot about employee voice and employee experience and employee value proposition. But what I'm seeing, Boomie, is a real rise of employee activism, and that voice is starting to make a difference and changing the nature of our organisations. So to challenge and to ask those questions through the recruitment and the hiring process is a really great opportunity. First, to inform yourself that it's the right employer, but also to let the employers know what is important to people who are coming into work. So the first thing I would be asking as an organisation, if I was in the interview process or recruitment process, is we know conflict is inevitable. We know that. We know it's going to happen. There's going to be tension in our teams. We know that the choices that the organisation makes, that our managers make and that we make, can make it either toxic and dysfunctional or constructive and functional. So the first question I would be asking is, when conflict arises in our teams, how skilled are our managers? Has my manager been trained on how to deal with conflict in the workplace. I would ask the HR person in the interview process to show me an example of their grievance procedure. Now, the grievance procedure may well have been written in 1976 and not been reviewed since that time. And it's out of date, it's outmoded, it's confrontational, it's adversarial. And that's talking to me about a culture within the organization where the policy framework is actually potentially quite damaging. So I would ask about the management capability, I would ask about the HR processes, and I would also ask as an employee, how do you listen to my voice?
Yeah.
What do you do? What systems are in place within this organization to ensure that I, as an employee, am heard? So I'd want to know that my voice is heard, and not just that the organization listens, although, as we know, that's really, really important, but also when you ask me my view, you take my view seriously. It's not, it might not be right, it's my view, but I'd like to know that it's treated with respect and that it's treated with dignity. Those are my main questions, I think, and that will be really important to understand the culture, the climate, and the competency of our managers and our HR function.
Yeah. So I really like what you say, because the very first thing you started talking about was recruitment processes. Again, people show up and they have studied and they have read about the service they're going to deliver, but may not always remember to study the organization itself, to understand the recruitment process and use that as a tool for determining whether you want to sit in that organization for a year or two to work or not. Even sitting at an interview and how you're interviewed by the people who represent the organization tells you a lot. I was talking to a colleague a few years back who talked about a wonderful job interview that she had gone for, 3-stage process and what have you. And when she came back, she told us all about this wonderful job, and then she got the offer. And you know what she did? She turned it down.
Wow.
And we were all shocked. We were saying, okay, look, you went and did the interview, we understand, but we sat up with you at night to help you coach and do all those sorts of things. So we were part of this. Why did you just turn the opportunity down? And then she went into a lot of dialogue around how she had been interviewed, how she had asked questions and the answers were coming but weren't the right answers, how she talked about the person that she would be reporting to, who were they, what were they like, would they normally sit on panels? And apparently the people that were interviewing were not terribly excited by her asking these sorts of questions. So she made up her mind that that was a reflection of the organization. So to some degree, I want to turn this on its head and say to organizations, apart from training in conflict and managing conflict like you mentioned, there is something about using the interview process as a tool for reassuring people that, you know what, we are the best employer you will find. We will hear you, we will listen to you, we will give you the space to talk. And for me, when you look at organizations on the internet, when you're studying for an interview or preparing, there's lots of glossy information out there. There's lots of stuff that says we tick this box, we tick that box, we tick the other box. But what we should also be looking at is, apart from ticking the box, can you tell me as an interviewee practically how you delivered on this?
Absolutely. And how inclusive is the way, so for instance, you can pick, we've all sat there in the interview and the chair of the interview owns the room and doesn't let anyone else get a word in. And you get those microaggressions of interrupting, shutting down, not being valuing people's feedback and voice. And you can feel it in the room, and it talks to me about an exclusive and closed and fixed mindset within that organization. I think your example is fantastic, Boone, because that takes real courage. It takes real courage to say, this isn't the right organization for me. But we often forget when we're in these recruitment processes, it's not just the organization recruiting you, you're choosing the right organization. And we often go in with our kind of cap doffed to the potential employer, and we're very grateful for the opportunities that they afford to us. And that's, of course, that's as it should be. But that's only one half of the equation. The other half of the equation is that the employee is bringing you in because of your inner brilliance, your talent, your amazing, authentic version of who you are. And if the organization isn't going to recognize that from the very beginning in the interview, then I think you're going to be finding it very challenging to have those conversations internally. So I think you've highlighted a really important point. It's a two-way conversation. It's not just a one-way street.
So what we're saying there, and I think we both agree on this, is if you step into an interview and you're already feeling like you can't be heard and you feel like you can't speak, already those are the signs that indicate that you might be in deeper waters in the future if you go into that organization. What I would normally say, even if you get the job, because I'll say to my friend, rather than just turn it down, did you then have a conversation about what you had seen and how you felt? She goes, no, I didn't want the job. I just made up my mind and I didn't. And that thing about courage is very important, to be able to feed back to an organization. Personally, I would say years ago, I don't think I would have been able to tell anyone to do this. I did myself. As you get more experience and you get more confident in yourself, you're able to have these kind of conversations. And I think there is a place as an employee or potential employee to feed back to an organization on your experience of the interview, because it makes a lot of difference.
It does, and I think people. It's a really interesting notion, and it's something I'm really passionate about. Is looking at individuals coming through these processes, because of course this is a system, the recruitment system, as users and almost as customers of the system. And what I'm really excited about this whole development of the notions of employee experience and aligning employee experience to customer experience is we should seek feedback and value the feedback of the users of the system. So in the case you've just described there, Bhumi, is giving feedback, even though you're not the right organisation for me. I'd like to share with you the reasons for that. And I think one of the issues I've faced in the past, I'm sure others have as well, is the organisation's closes down, it's not interested, it's not listening. But the smart organisation, the modern organisation, I think the successful organisations of the future will be the ones who really embrace that and see that as an opportunity for learning and for development. And that, I think, is a really powerful message to colleagues in organisations, to really listen from the very beginning, right at the early stage of the again, jargony, but the employee life cycle, the very beginning of the employee coming through, even if they choose not to work for the organisation.
Exactly. So one of the things for our listeners, and certainly for me and for both of us going forward, is one of the things to always look out for is the results of the staff surveys. An organization that does staff surveys is a great one. An organization that publishes the results of its staff survey is an extra good one, and one that can talk you through it in interview when you ask, and is telling you, do you know what, we found down over here, and this is what we're doing to make sure that going forward our employees have a better experience. That is a perfect organization as far as I'm concerned, because it can put its hands up to saying, do you know, we once got it wrong and we're on a journey to getting it better, and this is how we're going to get there. And that's what I mean by practical things to look out for before you step into an organization. That's good.
It's just good. It's a good, open and honest conversation about what's working well, because people don't expect the organisation to be perfect, do they, Bhumi? But if they come in and they know that they can have a good conversation about what's working well, because there'll be lots of good stuff, but also what's not working so well. And particularly if you look at some larger organisations, and particularly the experience of Black employees, we can see through the staff survey that they do experience discrimination, that they are struggling to have their cases upheld when they go through formal processes, that they are overrepresented in formal processes, and the statistics and the evidence is there. But I think what that presents is an opportunity, not just for an individual conversation at the interview process, but it's also an important conversation to have within our organisations in terms of how they're creating inclusive and safe and supportive environments where people can flourish. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a great point in terms of the survey data.
Absolutely. But having said that, I know we're banging on a bit, or I'm banging on a bit about organizations. There is a place for us as individuals as well to take responsibility for our own experience as well. And one of the things I've already started saying there is one of the ways to take ownership is to look at the organization, understand it, what's it about, ask questions. Because to be able to have a mature conversation with an organization, you've got to be coming from a position of, what transaction analysis says around, I'm okay and you're okay. So both parties have got to be okay. So you as an employee, if you've had negative experiences already, you've got to get to a place where you've done some work with those negative experiences so that they don't influence how you respond and how you see and perceive an organization. By no means am I suggesting that if you're a victim, you're to blame, but I'm suggesting that you can power down, recuperate, and then come back up to join an organization from a very healthy position, because that's what helps as well to make the experience a positive one at work.
No, absolutely. I think it's a really important part of the process of tackling these issues and tackling conflicts and bullying and harassment in the workplace, and understanding the stuff that's going on in our brains and in our minds, and the way that we're feeling, the way we're reacting, and the way that we're responding to a particular situation. And there are some real strategies that people can be using, which I'm sure we'll explore as we're going through the conversation to help tackle some of those issues.
Yes, so that was the next thing I was going to go into, about how the individual takes responsibility and how they come from a position of strength, and they come from a position of power when they're dealing with these things, so that they don't remain an underdog. And as you've mentioned the word strategy, I'm going to say, what sort of strategies do you see or do you suggest that employees can use to put them in a position of strength?
No, absolutely. Well, I think the first thing is that doing nothing is not a strategy, and unfortunately, and of course, there's good reasons often for not doing things. I'm fearful of raising an issue for recrimination or retaliation, or I know someone who's had a difficult time because they raised an issue, and oftentimes what we find is people experience the most horrendous behaviors from other people, and abuses of power, and gaslighting and bullying. Yeah. And sometimes it goes on and it goes on. And I've walked into teams where it seems to have just gone on for years. I mean, it's almost becomes intolerable. And the impact on people, their mental health, their well-being, their relationships at home, they take an absolute hammering, Bhumi, and it's incredibly sad. And I meet people who are incredibly sad and demotivated. And sometimes in particular, I do a lot of work in the healthcare sector. I ask people, how do you get out of bed in the morning? And it's a commitment to patients, or it's a commitment, whatever it is. They're often very committed to the purpose of the organisation or the needs of the patient or the customer. But it almost the experience in their workplace is so destructive. So doing nothing is not an option. But similarly, what we do find is then people sometimes want to do something and then they engage in behaviours which I think can become more damaging. We see gossiping, rumours being spread. We are avoiding dealing with the issue and having conversation with the individual concerned, but we'll speak to everyone else around the situation. It becomes very inflammatory, very adversarial. We see bitter feuds developing within teams, and a polarisation of I'm right, you're wrong, and the fingers of blame are pointing. And again, I worry deeply about that, because I often think that the conversation that you need to be having is with that other person. Because what happens in our head is they're the devil incarnate. How can you expect me to have a conversation with them? And our brain is full of with the amygdala's thrown away, our bit of our brain, that chimp voice, if people know the chimp paradox, it's thrown away. We're full of cortisol, we're feeling stressed, we're in that fight or flight mode. And it's at that moment we need to show real courage, because although our brain and our mind and our heart is telling us that the person's the devil incarnate, they're not actually the devil incarnate. They've done something or said something that's upset me or caused me offense. And I need to be able to have a conversation to understand, and for them to understand the impact of what they've said to me. What were you trying to say? What was the issue? People don't get out of bed on the whole, Bhumi. I mean, I'll accept that there are some people who do, but the vast majority of people do not get out of bed in the morning to go into work and be destructive and harmful and hateful and hurtful to others. And although my experience of you is that you are being these things, actually by going talking to everyone else and not dealing with it, it worsens the situation. So to me, the strategy is first recognize it's not acceptable. The second one is have a conversation as early as you can with the other person, so that they can speak, you can talk and you can listen and you can gain insight and learning through that conversation. And if that doesn't work, then I think it's absolutely appropriate to seek support from another senior manager, of course, from the people function, from the HR function. And we would expect those individuals, senior managers, HR, union reps and others, to support and to listen, to take it very seriously. This can't be swept under the carpet or ignored or hope that it's just going to go away, or it's not as bad as it sounds. Actually, we need to take it extremely seriously. But again, my advice to those people, HR leaders, senior managers and union representatives and others, is to seek a mechanism to try and encourage a dialogue between the two individuals, maybe with a mediator, a facilitator, or someone there who can help bring our two parties together to have a conversation. So those are the sort of initial steps. And of course, if that doesn't resolve it, then the organisation may need to consider a more formal route. But the vast majority of cases can be resolved in those early stages through a direct conversation between the two individuals.
Yeah, because most human beings, we are wired in such a way that we don't want to have quarrels, we don't want to argue, we don't want to fight over things, we don't want to not get on, we want to. And it's the desire to have a positive experience. That's one of the things that makes us run away when we see conflict. So what I'm hearing you say, and what I heard you starting to say at the beginning, was something about training and training for managers. Certainly my eyes opened after I did a 3-day intensive training session in mediation a few years back. And this came about because there were lots of complex complaints that I had to manage. And there was something about process was great, but it just wasn't enough. And I started thinking, so how do we talk to people without being frightened? Because that was my main thing. I was always terrified that, oh my God, this is going to go very wrong. And then I went off. And after that, a lot of things changed for me, how I relate to my team members when there's conflict, how I expect people to relate to me when there's conflict, how I relate to an organization when there's conflict. And one of the things that I learned most was that because you're dealing with conflict, because you're talking about conflict, you don't necessarily need to fall out. You can have a constructive conversation.
Absolutely.
To disagree. That can happen. That's a healthy place to get to. So resolving conflict doesn't always mean that everybody will agree on the same thing, but it means that if we're going to disagree, we will disagree constructively and we will still continue to be able to work in a healthy way, because that's the key priority here. Working in a healthy way that allows you to thrive in the workplace.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I think in some respects, we make certain choices about whether it's going to be a healthy disagreement or an unhealthy disagreement. And that sounds quite hard when you're talking to people who are in a conflict and feeling that they are the victim, or that the person is the bully. To say, actually, there are certain choices that we're all making. And it's not to say that you've chosen to be in the position that you're in, but it's not necessarily that they've chosen the position that they're in. So my job as a mediator and trying to encourage people to think about how they manage conflict is to get beyond those right, wrong, victim, perpetrator type language and focus not on those issues per se, but to focus on how are you feeling? One of the first big F words that we deal with in conflict, and don't worry, Boomy, I'm not going to be using any offensive language. I'm talking about feelings. I'm talking about fear. I'm talking about failure. You know, some of these words can be really, really challenging. So, you know, one of the questions is, how are you feeling? What impact has this had? And what I often find when I speak to both of the parties in a conflict, doesn't matter which side of the fence they're sat on, they feel frustrated and upset, and isolated and worried and guilty and so on and so forth. And actually, they're often much closer together in the way that they're feeling and the impact. We can see this, and then we can build little bridges of empathy. They can start to imagine what's going on for the other person. But this really interesting question then is, okay, what do you need to happen tomorrow to not feel frustrated, but to feel supported, and not feel excluded, but to feel included? And what they tell me is they need to feel heard and valued and respected and treated with dignity. And actually, that's what party A says. And I go and speak to the other one and say, well, what do you need? And they say, I need to be heard and valued and respected and treated with dignity. And actually, what we find is when we start to get to those human needs being there, we start to understand that, then we can start to see that the parties can make new choices, because the choices can be about how do we fulfill our need and do so in a way which also fulfills your need. And there's a mutuality there, or convergent of need. And it's in that space that the miracles begin to happen. And it's in that space that we start to see real insight and understanding. And of course, in a conflict, as we've all experienced, a road rage incident, or the kids not putting their shoes on for school, or an office quarrel, or someone's pushed in line at the shop, wherever. We know how that feels to go like, We've been there. We've all been there. Everyone's been there.
Yeah.
But it takes real courage to get into the detail, and that's where I think the real magic of a human relationship can start to become clear.
Talking about the human feelings, somebody has said, one of our audience says, having a conversation with the other person is not that easy, especially when you're angry. And in what I'm hearing you say, and what I know from personal experience as well, is there are lots of psychological things going on when we get to a point of conflict. And one of them, like you mentioned clearly, is fear. And the person who's commented there says anger is another one. So there is something about doing some mini psychological type work before you get into managing conflict, to make sure that some of the emotions that will interfere with the process and prevent it from being a constructive one, to make sure that those are actually dealt with before we get there, so that we're coming with an open mind that this can actually work if I engage in it constructively.
Yeah. I think it's a really interesting point, because feelings to me are the gateway. It's okay. We've got a real problem in our organisations, Booming, in our society, with anger in particular. Anger's bad. It's not bad. Anger's great. Great things happen when people are angry. The world changes.
Oh, I think I've lost David for a brief moment. There's something.
Yeah, I apologies. I don't know what happened. I think it was at my end, Boomy. So apologies to you and to everyone who's watching today. I think it was my internet was just in conflict with me. So I've tried to resolve it, and I explained to it how I was feeling. I was feeling frustrated, Boomy. So we've resolved our router issues. But I was saying that the anger isn't the issue. It's how we choose to behave when we're angry. Now, if I'm in I've got a series of A's that I use. It's what I call four A's. The first thing I would do if I'm talking to someone is affirm it's okay to be angry. It's okay to be frustrated. And I would acknowledge those strong feelings and recognize them. And that's often important for people to feel that they're heard and validated, and that those feelings aren't bad. I wouldn't try and extract them and remove them. I'd actually embrace those strong feelings for what they are. I'd affirm and acknowledge. I'd then ask some questions. Why are you angry? What's the cause? What perhaps needs to happen in order to feel less angry? How do you think the other person's feeling? Maybe seek some understanding there. And then my fourth A is to identify alternatives. What are the alternatives to feeling angry, and how can you and they begin to put those in place? So to me, it's those feelings. We're really, people are very scared. I was doing some training, Boomy, and I was talking about feelings with some managers, and a manager said to me, "But David, can I just check, are you allowed to ask your employees how they feel?" I was talking about emotional intelligence. I thought, hang on. How have we got to a position where you're asking me as a manager whether it's okay to ask your employees how they feel? They're desperate for you to ask them how they're doing. Yeah. They're desperate. Go and ask them. And once you start having those conversations, what we find is it becomes a much more open and emotionally intelligent environment where we know we're okay. So no, don't be afraid of the anger, and don't be embarrassed about the anger. It's the behaviors, the aggression, and all the rest of it. That's the problem. The anger isn't the problem.
Yeah. So the key to this, what you're saying, is acknowledge the feelings. Make sure you acknowledge them. Otherwise, you're already on a slippery slope to nowhere you don't. Yeah.
Absolutely. And you can't go like this. You have to listen. We have and give the other person a jolly good listening to. Yeah. We can't stick our finger in our ears, or our head in the ground, or sweep this under the carpet. And there may well be, it may be a difficult conversation. There may be tears. People might get cross and upset. But do you know something? That's okay.
Yeah.
That is okay. And that's really important to stress.
Yes, because once you've got those out of the way, you can then move on to some constructive work around resolving the problems. I was reading something earlier on this morning, and it had a picture of a great big tree, and then it had a picture of the roots underneath the tree. And it said something about, to solve a problem, don't pick the leaves off the tree, get to the root of the problem. And the way to get to the root of the problem in this context that we're discussing, acknowledge people's feelings. They're angry, they're hurt, they feel unheard. So acknowledge those things. Already that starts to take the steam out of the situation, which is a good thing to do to get to a constructive place in managing conflict.
Absolutely.
So we've been talking for about 34 minutes. I think between you and I, David, if we got given a whole day, we'll carry on.
I'd be quite happy to do it, Boo, mate.
We'd carry on talking for the whole day. I have to say it's awesome talking to you, because there's a lot of stuff in my mind sometimes that I think, is it because I'm a counsellor? Am I too touchy-feely? Why am I talking about feelings? But actually, in talking to you and in reading your book, which we're going to come on to in a minute, I recognize that, no, actually, it's a good thing to be able to see and hear how people feel, because it makes a difference to how you then get to either manage that conflict well or not.
Absolutely, okay. Absolutely.
So let's talk about your books, David. I'm not going to take over this show, because I really want you to tell us about the first one and tell us about the second one. The first one I'm reading, but I'm going to ask you, tell us a bit about it. What's it called?
Thank you, Boomy. So my first book's called Managing Conflict, The Practical Guide to Resolution in the Workplace. I really enjoyed, when I had a feeling I've got a book inside me. I was fighting to get out. So around 2016, I sat down and began work on just all of the things I'd learned about managing conflict over the years, restorative justice, mediation in particular, I started to work on. But what I became really focused on around that time was the existing policies and processes in place in our organisation. So I was going in to organisations across the UK and globally as a mediator and resolving conflicts and managing disputes because of the stuff that was happening elsewhere in the organisation, the systems, the processes, and the culture. So I set out in my first book an alternative grievance procedure called a resolution policy, and just saying to HR professionals and to leaders and managers, you don't need a grievance procedure. There's no legal and moral or statutory duty to have one. And if you speak to people who are using the process, everybody is getting hurt and injured through the process. And unless your organisation exists to create harm and injury to your staff and your employees, then maybe you could do things differently. And that was a real focus for the text. And it was about integrating mediation, both the process of mediation and the principles of mediation and restorative justice into our organisations. And I'm talking restorative principles about dialogue, empathy, building trust, collaborative problem solving, common ground, building those connections rather than the blame, shame and punish approach, which was and is prevalent, what I call a retributive justice model, and that's what the second book's is doing. It's looking more at organizational culture. So this new book is called Transformational Culture, and it's a guide to developing a person-centered and high-performing organization. And in my new book, I set out a new justice model for organizations called transformational justice. Because in many of our organizations, we've taken the retributive blame and shame and punish model, and we've attached it to this model of due process. You have to follow these stages. And we've coupled them together. And actually what I've done is I've decoupled them. We don't have to beat our people up and destroy their relationships in order to be able to get a just outcome. We can still do things properly and thoroughly, but get a restorative and just and fair outcome. So what I'm helping organizations do, I hope, is to develop in a new framework whereby we can develop fair, just, inclusive, sustainable and high-performing organizations, and still have a due process whereby we're following a legally sound and a correct mechanism for resolving issues, but with a much greater emphasis on a person-centered and a values-based approach where dialogue, engagement, connections, bringing people together is key. So that's the start point. I talk about the shift in the HR, human resources function. I talk about the emphasis on leaders and managers to do things differently, to really engage in and build cooperative systems for resolving issues. So it comes out in September.
Okay, I'm looking forward to that. I really want to see it because I like the concept of high performing organizations. And actually, you can be a high performing individual, slightly out of the context of being an employee, but as a human being, how you function in your day to day life. Let's say I'm a counselor, so I work with how we function and thrive as human beings. And I'm going to say, I know you didn't necessarily have counselors in mind when you wrote the first book, that bit I can tell you, but actually, it's a very good tool for counselors. And I'll come back on a different day how I have been using it and how it's really helped me as a counselor and actually helped me in my own personal growth as well. So it's a great book, a great book. It's well done with that one, and I look forward to the second one.
Boomy, thank you very much. That's really lovely feedback. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
You're entirely welcome. Before we go, I'm going to just talk about this one thing that you mentioned, a person-centered approach. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that means? Because that's a bit of a technical term, and I just want you to be able to help us break it down, because I know it would be valuable for anybody watching this to know what that means.
Yeah. So if we think about our current systems for resolving bullying, harassment, and discrimination, the primary focus in the process is about reducing the risk to the employer in the face of future litigation. People might deny that and argue with that and say that's not the purpose, but actually the primary purpose is to protect the employer in the face of future litigation. And then it builds out a set of systems and processes, and it might create what I call a mirage of fairness and illusion of justice by plonking in a bit of informal resolution in one of the stages. But let's all be honest, it's just an illusory approach to try and pretend that we're doing something, but actually the focus is on protecting the organisation and the tribunals. So I'm all for taking that away and removing that and saying, actually, if we put our people, the needs of our people, I've described some of those already around dignity, fairness, justice, dialogue in the centre. And also we take our organisation's values and we put those into the centre as well, and then build processes around the people and the values. Now, those processes can still be procedurally robust and stand up in the tribunal. So there's no risk by going into the tribunals. But what we've done, Boomy, is we've put our people central into that. And what that means is then all of those key, again, jargony terms, stakeholders, but those HR professionals, human resources professionals, managers and leaders, union reps, they're all there to support the needs of the individual and to deliver the values, rather than creating all of these divisions and barriers to actually sitting down and resolving issues. So it's a completely new way of looking at how we solve problems. And again, in the new book, I'm advocating the removal of the performance management systems from our workplaces, the disciplinary procedures from our workplaces, the absence procedures from our workplaces, and also more importantly than all is the grievance, bullying and harassment, what I call the GBH policies. I'm calling for their wholesale removal from the workplace with the replacement of an overarching resolution framework which actually supports and encourages and promotes a people-centered and values-based approach. And the good news is we've got some great case studies of organizations who are doing this now. So it'll all be there in the book.
Perfect. I look forward to it. Do you know what you've just described as we start to round off is one of the things that researchers like Michael West talk about. Yes. He's done an awful lot of research, and I referenced him a lot in my dissertation when I was doing my MSc, because he's just got this exactly what you're talking about, this person-centered approach to working with your employees and getting on an equal footing, because what that then means is your clients will be happy. If your staff are not happy, your clients will not be happy, and that is not good for an organization. So surely it is a win-win situation if we put the human touch back into how we manage these situations of conflict rather, when we're in the workplace.
No, absolutely, Boomy. But it's not possible to do that with the existing HR systems. We can't call ourselves compassionate human resources professionals or progressive managers and leaders and create this human-centered organization, but still have these rigid, dogmatic, divisive and damaging processes at play. So this is about recalibrating the organizations. And I think, I'm a big fan of Michael West's work and the whole move towards compassionate leadership. So I'm really pleased you've referenced that. I think it's so important.
Good. Another thing that we both like. Wonderful stuff.
Love it.
It's been awesome talking to you, and good luck with the new book. I will be looking out for it in September. That's one I'm going to add to my list of things to read when I get there. And,
I shall send you a copy with my compliments, Boomy.
Yay! Thank you so much. Excellent stuff. I'm excited. That will be an early Christmas present right there in September.
You're very welcome.
Thank you very much for joining us, and I hope everyone who's watching or who watches later on enjoys the broadcast and gets to take away some valuable nuggets for functioning and thriving in the workplace. Thank you to everybody who's joined us. Thank you to everybody who will watch this. Look out for us again. We come back every so often. In particular, we come on a Friday evening, usually at 8 p.m. to talk about some of the issues that affect Black and ethnic minority employees in the workplace. Thank you for watching.
Thank you, Boomy.